I'm your host, Riem Zin Labidin, and you are listening to Tech Tag Podcast.
Hello, I'm Fabian. I am a director of technology, data, and BI at Data and AI within ECCO. And I'm going to share a bit more about my professional journey with you.
Hi, Fabian. Welcome to the podcast. I'm very excited to be talking to you about your journey, to know more about you. What are the cool things that you are doing besides your job?
There is not a lot of space besides a job, but of course, let me start maybe with some technical hobbies that I suppose most people who kind of work in tech have. So I, as many others, have a home lab or home server, as whatever you might call it. So tinkering around with that, trying to recover it from crashes that I also have caused. It's definitely taking a bit of time, but also a bit of pleasure in my life and learning new things. Aside from that, I travel quite a bit, both for work, but also for private reasons. I have a daughter of almost 2 years old. She's taking up quite a bit of my time, as I may put it like that, but it's very pleasurable. And between that, family engagements, meeting friends, honestly, most of my day is already gone.
Yeah, but it's already a lot of fun stuff during the day.
It's packed. It's not leaving a lot of space to wonder about anything else.
Yeah. And do you remember how you started, like the journey? What first drew you into the world of technology?
Oh.
Is there like even a story that makes
Is there
you
an origin story
exactly
to my CV? Yes. I started off early. I think my dad put me in front of a computer somewhere around 5 years old or something, and it was fascinating ever since. You copy the grown-ups, you look at what they're doing. They interact a lot with computers, and I suppose maybe just during the whole, it's called school career, the things that I felt I was the most productive, where I had the most motivation to really sit down many hours in the day and follow through, were mostly related to solving problems, whether they were software, hardware related, or whether it was just creating some school project using some new tools. I think all of that was very fun. So I think it's mostly the endorphins you get from tinkering, playing, and learning with technology with very, very little input needed in order to discover new things. That's just like everything right there at your fingertips. That makes it tempting and irresistible, at least for my life.
And was it from the very beginning they teach like programming, etc. in school, or did you have to study in different places?
Yeah. I had no places where I learned, I say anything in school about computers. Mm-hmm. I think I very actively tried to avoid any of those computer science classes. I did not feel that computers were supposed to have that big part in my life because I already spent so much time during those years. So most of it is honestly self-taught from the very beginning, where you just have some interest and you read and you read and you try and you read. So I studied mathematics for my bachelor, mm-hmm. which was great, a lot of fun, very challenging, especially to start with. And I also, for my master's, did not study computer science. It was all just part of the tools, part of the trade to be able to work with computers fluently. So I guess it's the most beautiful hobby I had throughout my not that long life so far.
That's interesting, because usually when someone gets interested into computers, they would use this as a direction that, yes, if I would pick educational path, it would be about computers. But it's interesting that you thought, okay, it's enough to have it as a hobby and let's do something else. And you also explored things that you also like. You like mathematics.
Right. It was difficult for me to decide, finishing my A-levels, what I actually wanted to study, because I had, I think, something like 6 or 7 interests that I thought would be interesting to pursue. And I think from what I see there, it's actually not so uncommon to have people that did not study computer science actually spent quite a lot of times with computers just because they have to kind of have the drive to get the knowledge themselves. And I at least didn't feel that they would be lacking in a lot of departments when it comes to people who did study computer science. But of course, I also don't have a full picture of everyone's skills, abilities.
In general, like at school, it's not easy to get the kid interested about something to learn. It's mostly about like, let's play. And it is interesting how you kept going on your hobby and tried to explore and to have that curiosity. It's like you saw it as a game.
Yeah, it's maybe even let's see how far we can get not properly learning all of this stuff, right? There is a bit of a challenge that you put to yourself. If you just focus on one thing, you probably will become an expert at it if you spend enough time. But then, on the other hand, you have to abandon all of the other interesting things that are in this world. And there are so many cool things to do and things to experience. So I guess I didn't want to rob myself of that.
And then when you started to look into your first jobs or internships, was it like related to technologies?
So just to tie I teaser that I didn't do computer science for my master's, but what I actually did was experimental particle physics. And at that point, that was 2012, I moved to Lund, Sweden. So at that point, I had my bachelor's in mathematics, and then it was part of an Erasmus exchange that I went to Sweden. I think the plan was to stay a year, take courses in mathematics, and then go back to the University of Hamburg, where I did my bachelor's in order to finish the Master's of Science in mathematics. There was actually a bit more time for exploration because some of the curriculum that I had in Lund was giving that kind of freedom to pick new classes and new courses. And they didn't even have to do anything with mathematics at that point whatsoever. And I had the option of actually browsing a bit around, visiting different classes, trying out different things. And I guess the interesting thing for me was that there were other subjects. Well, I guess I kind of knew that there were other subjects and that they would also be interesting, but that they would actually be possible for me to take with a basis in mathematics without having had all of the basics that people had there. So I actually did my Master's of Science in physics without ever having taken a bachelor's in physics before.
Mm-hmm.
And that was definitely challenging because you are missing a lot of the basics. So you have to kind of get to this drawing table and, given a problem, figure out what do I not know that I need to know in order to be able to solve that. And I think that's rather similar to working with computers, where I also had very little idea about it, but I was interested and you're trying to solve it. So you just have to learn all of the things that you need to have in your inventory in order to progress somewhat to the next level. And I think one of the reasons that experimental particle physics is so interesting for me is that it is so strongly correlated or intertwined with data processing and computers. So most of the work you do is writing program code in order to process gigantic amounts of data volumes. And that starts, I mean, if you're talking there about processing data volumes, that starts actually way earlier, where you just try to throw away data in order to have something to a reasonable rate of data that is incoming. And I know, VMU and I have been working with data for quite a while. I think the amount of data that you can get there it's just too much to physically store or capture ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to figure out what you actually want to keep and what you want to throw away is already so important. And only, at that point, you're actually at the hardware level. You're not ever at the software level because it's so fast. The frequencies at which you observe these it was mostly collider physics, or those collisions of particles. But that's already where anything related to computers, automated processing helped me so much that this was already pushing me hard into the direction of computer science and computers in general. So following that was now the long intro to your question. Following that, of course, after that master's, I would straight go into tech. There was not that much else for me that I would have done. Well, I did do a couple of detours at that point as well, but I'm sure we talk about it.
And like the way how you learn about things is through reading, or what is like your skills of learning?
Yeah, my skill of learning. Trial and error is a lot of it. I think trying to correlate information, but a lot of it is, of course, reading, because most of the things you don't even know that you don't know them. So you somehow have to sample the information so to get some kind of an overview. And then you discover that so many different sources have very different applications and very different granularity that you could have. Different sources are really good for some parts of learning than for others. It really helps to have some kind of an overview, course, class, books that show you parts of the field, but they will not be enough to actually help you, guide you through different exercises. I usually like talking to other people about it, trying to think out loud what I think the problem is. And at that point, you discover where you might be going wrong. But I suppose, as many, attending lectures, reading papers and books is mostly what gives the first insight. And then I guess in the end, hours spent on the problem is a good indicator. If you spend the next 2 weeks only wondering or worrying about one thing, by the end of it, there's a pretty good chance you will have ventured into many possible avenues and thought about that problem from so many sides that you at least have an idea to solve it.
Sometimes when we don't know much about a project or about any topic, let's say, and we know that we need to solve the problem, like sometimes we don't need to know everything. There is a specific detail that we need to focus on, despite we don't have the knowledge about the whole system. And sometimes the way of thinking, it says, no, I have to know everything in order to make things work. Maybe it is not directly related to this. I am curious, how you perceive this. Do you think that it's okay, to not know everything to solve the problem, to focus on the, what has to be done? Or it's necessary to look into, the basics on everything?
I guess the answer is, from my perspective, it depends. Mostly whether what you're trying to achieve is a one-off task. I think there are definitely options where I could get lost in a problem if I try to find out everything that is underlying it. But I think especially when it comes to computers or things that we are doing as part of our job on a daily basis, it usually helps to understand reasons. If you only know at a very high level what the steps are that you need to take, it will be very difficult to solve similar tasks in the future. And I guess in the end, we hopefully pride ourselves with trying to accomplish something that is somewhat new, or we are not just machines that receive an instruction to do A and to do B, but we actually would like to problem solve. And how else are we going to problem solve if we are not understanding some of the mechanics of what we're trying to achieve there? So for me, it would be very hard to not understand what things do and then just apply the same pattern again and again. And I think I can often not follow when people are having some technical issues with the devices that they're using because they're not aware of what happens under the hood. And I cannot claim that I would be aware of everything that happens under the hood either. But I have this curiosity to want to know what that actually means, what I'm doing there. That's necessary, at least for me, to get myself up and do it.
Makes sense. And like you said, it depends also into the situation, the context. Sometimes I look into the connections. For example, if there is a bug, I focus on the connection so I can fix it as fast as possible. But then I find out that I don't know how things work. Despite that, I can solve it.
I like to call it somewhat like building your mental model, and you probably need very different levels of abstraction. I work with computers and operating systems mostly as one level of abstraction. And for many tasks, this is perfectly fine. I can think of my operating system as something that helps me schedule processes and tasks and does input-output and communicates with all my devices. And it just works fine. I don't really have to think about more. I just ask for resources and I get it.
Yeah.
And only if that mental model breaks down in some corner cases, then I have to think about that. So I guess in your example, it's it makes a lot of sense, right? You just want to think about how does the system communicate, and it's a black box, and I don't need to understand what is in there at this point, because I can observe the system already from the outside by its communication. Something goes in there and it doesn't go out there. That's probably something where it got stuck. But then you still have to dig, right? And I guess at some point, if you see the same problems happening again and again, you probably get curious. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
why is this happening? And only then, I guess, we can really grow with our learning, where we actually see, this is something I don't understand. Why does this keep happening, right? And then we learn.
Yeah, to dive deep into like every detail. And then when you started looking for your first job, like how was the process? Because many people, after they finish their masters or like their studies, they start to go in the professional environment. It's difficult for the first job.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and that is always how it is, right? If you want to hire someone, you want to hire people with experience. If you want to get hired, you don't have experience, and it's a bit of a trade-off, and obviously it is requiring an investment from every side of understanding what people are you actually needing for your job, where can you find them, and how can you train them, and what do you actually need them to do? Do you have a proper job description? Do you have some processes that help them lift them up? Do you have mentorship programs? All of those kind of things. So for me, I have to say another little detour for that. So I mentioned I was in Sweden for my master's. For my, first job afterwards, I actually moved country at that point. So I moved to Berlin, where I lived in 2015. And it was a relatively straightforward, I guess, very much according to the German standard of you write applications for positions that you find, and they invite you for interviews and talk to you and see whether you're a good fit. One of them where I actually started, which was an IT consultancy that was based in Berlin, that was consulting banks and insurances in the German-speaking countries for digital transformations of their banking systems and processing systems. So that was relatively straightforward. You get a phone call pretty fast after you send an application. You go to an interview, you talk to the people, you tell them a bit about what you know, what you've been doing, what kind of skills you have. And if they have a good understanding of what that means, you have a higher chance of getting hired. It's actually something that not only for the first job, but for most other positions I've been seeing. I mentioned that I don't have a degree in computer science. It's particle physics and mathematics. And that means for hiring managers who are not familiar with what that means, it's harder for them to see whether you would be a good fit for the role. If you have hiring managers who either have the same background or who have hired in the past people who have degrees in those subjects, they might know what that means. And what it means for mathematics and for physics is a large amount of logical thinking and abstraction. I would call it a high pain threshold, because you do have to go through some suffering in order to actually get there. And those hiring managers have in the past hired people who've been showing good promise and good performance. They are much more likely to say, oh, I know what that means. I'm curious to see whether this would be the same fit. So for this case, that was also the same, right? There is a lot of people who come from with the background of natural science who start in IT consultancies all around the world. So I guess they kind of knew what they would be getting. But I actually didn't stay very long at that IT consultancy. So it was only in 2015 that I worked there, because by January 2016, I actually already started to go back to Scandinavia, to Copenhagen in this case, where I then started a PhD in experimental particle physics. That's usually scheduled to last about 3 years, which was pretty much exactly how long it took me. You also get a contract in Denmark that pretty much mandates that as soon as you hand in your thesis, your employment stops. So by the time that I handed it in, which was pretty much exactly 3 years, I was done. So then you also only have to defend your PhD thesis, and then you can look for different employments. Same story, actually, for me as well. You write applications, send them to companies that are hiring. And, one of them will probably give you a call or write you an email. In this case, it was an ed tech company. Their offices were in Copenhagen, but it was actually a a company headquartered in New York that was looking for what they called a data scientist. And that's where I applied and got a call back if I could come to the office and have an interview meeting. And that was actually a great interview meeting, good conversations. So that's where I started.
Cool. Comparing this transition from studying and researching mostly and working in a professional environment, is there like some challenges that pushed you to improve your skills? Maybe soft skills. Also, if there are also challenges related to technologies.
Yeah, that's a interesting question, because if I think about it, it wasn't at all feeling different for me going from academia there to industry. I think it's mostly because the PhD in particle physics is actually, so it was in collaboration with the European Center for Nuclear Research called CERN in Switzerland. And there I was part of an experiment of maybe 2,500 scientists. So there is already big organization and structure, including almost like departments where you have work groups, subgroups, you have different analysis that are working. So there is already basically like teams or the setup where you are collaborating a lot with international researchers. And quite a bit of that is even project management and just being able to collaborate with different people around the globe, where time zones are usually a bit tough to get under like the same umbrella. And that was already very similar to part of the consulting that I did before. There was a lot of project management involved and just being able to get results. And then the same where I work at that edtech company, where you are having basically the same problems. You try to sift through a large amount of data. You have certain boundary conditions in terms of how much computational resources can I spend? What is the business requirement here? So the equivalent would be, what is the physics results that we actually want to see? What is interesting? Mm-hmm. And then you have the tools that you have to apply to get there. So the vocabulary is different. The way of working is actually rather similar. And especially that office in Copenhagen was actually staffed by quite a high number of PhDs in different areas who probably have a very similar way of working together as well. So I think that showed maybe also, as in my experience of communication is smooth. You have people who are critically thinking, who are not in need of having every single step laid out for them, who can solve the task without being held by the hand for too long. So I think, honestly, for me, it wasn't a huge paradigm shift.
Yeah, it seems also the environment was really good. And then during that time, you were working as a data scientist?
Yes, exactly. So the whole office had a setup where it might be a bit hard to distinguish between a data engineer and a data scientist. There's a lot of ETL, extract, transform, load data. There's also a lot of generally programming requirements in order to be able to communicate with the machinery so that you actually get positive results. And then there's the whole data science part where you actually have also a lot of data, not at all particle physics order of magnitude data, but still a lot of data. And you have to be able to correlate that data in some shape or form. And that data is, in many cases, not very rich in attributes. So you don't have very high dimensions of data there. You have a lot, but each data point is representing only a very specific thing in time. And that means that you have to be a bit cunning about what you can do with that. How do you extract information by the volume and not so much by each data point? So that was pretty much my role. And as such, we write algorithms that, of course, are running on the infrastructure that is there provided. We have quite some challenges with that over time, right? I think also teams learn. There's a bit of a trajectory where you can see skills that teams pick up over time just because these are new tasks that you do and you have done them a couple of times and you build up the knowledge. And while I started as a data scientist, you kind of develop in your role a bit. And that means in the first instance, taking a bit more responsibility of some of the concepts and algorithms, and maybe taking ownership of the direction that they should be developed into. If you have certain business constraint, then you kind of at a bit of a crossroads between, do I go more into this specialist role where I dig deeper and deeper into the subject, or do I look more for how can I help lift some of the other members of the office and on the teams there up? So maybe a bit more of a team lead role. And I kind of did, I did both, but I first ventured a bit more into the specialist role until I took leadership of one of the teams of data scientists in that company, and then led them for a couple of years, which was a very fun and rewarding thing to do, because you work with people who are smart and driven and curious, and you try to help them steer, maybe at some point even a bit strategically, into a direction that can lift up maybe not just the team, but the company as a whole, because what you're working on, of course, should be beneficial to the business goals in the ultimate sense.
So also you participate on decision making related to technologies, which technologies to use, etc.
Yes. So I think it's very natural that there are teams who are working very closely in their day-to-day with all of that data, and they of course have the best insight to give you some kind of feedback of what works well and where are the limitations that they experience. And then you have to somewhat see, is it limitation as part of maybe some operational challenges? Maybe we didn't decide on the process well enough, or are we limited here by some previous choices? And are those choices that we made, but that may have been completely valid at the time, are those still accurate? And then we talked abstraction levels somewhere in the beginning of our conversation. It's kind of the same, right? So you have a mental model. Yeah. Is this still accurate? Do I have to change it? Do I think about data now in a different way? Do I still accept my mental model, or do I have to go back and change it? And there, of course, you need to have also a lot of exchange with people from the more, it's called business side of the whole company, that can tell you a bit more about what they are hearing from customers and other parts of the ecosystem, of what direction they think everything will go, and what can we derive from that in terms of specifications of what should our pipelines be able to handle in the next year or 2 or 10, in order to see, are we on path to ensure that, or is this something where we would need to raise some flags now to say, we need to invest here in order to be running fine also in 2 years. That's where it becomes a bit challenging, right? Because there are so many different parts that you have to optimize for, or you can optimize for. And having this balance between reliability or improving the set of features that you're supporting as an engineering team going forward, where do you say yes, where do you say no, what kind of agency do you have, and having this kind of almost negotiation with other parts of the company of what we can provide and what we cannot provide and what requirements we need to have. And at that point, it becomes very, you're kind of leaving parts of engineering more and more behind in order to advocate a bit more for what the role of the team is and negotiate that role of the team. That's where it gets very interesting, because you have more impact, but that also comes at a bit of a, I don't know,
responsibility, or
yes, responsibility, exactly.
I can imagine it's a lot of responsibilities, but also it helps you to grow more in your soft skills, especially like the way how you communicate with different people, and to also sometimes you need to be neutral in some ways. For example, if you know that there is a specific solution that would work and you trust that it will work, but some people maybe have different experiences, so you have that flexibility to get the different inputs to take a decision altogether, the right decision for the specific problem.
Yes, I like to think of it especially in some shape of impact. Where do you have impact? And when you are working on as what is often called individual contributor, an IC role, where you are trying to solve some tasks or problem, your impact is on that task and problem, right? So, and I suppose we've all been there, where we are working on something for a couple of weeks and then we deliver it, and let's say it's a new feature and we are curious how it's being used, and you see it's not being used.
Yeah.
And at that point, you just, okay, you solved the task, but now actually the more impactful question would have been, was that the right task to solve? Should you have solved another task with your time? And then the next step is, okay, if I'm the team lead now for the team, then I should be the one that can decide what the team is working on, and I can make sure that the tasks that we're working on are meaningful and are going to be used and having the highest impact. And then you talk, of course, to stakeholders in the business, and they, of course, also have requests for you, and you have to negotiate a bit. And you realize that some of those constraints that make you choose this task in the first place, you might still not have any impact on, right? Which is also natural because you can't be determining the whole direction of the business or the tech or any of those. And then I guess you ask yourself, okay, what's the next level at which I can have an impact? Where can I make sure that maybe on a level of how we make decisions, maybe not every individual decision, but that we make those decisions based on a foundation that is data-driven, motivated, takes into account, as you said, the constraints from some of the tech where people have experience with it within the team, but also requirements from the different business, and bring all of that together. And then not just think about it in an individual case, but think about it in a way of how could I shape this into a process that allows teams to work with that without having to involve me, where ideally I do not exist as a role. And then they're still hopefully happy and get a good achievement, and also have their task being impactful, meaningful, and all of those things. So it's kind of the impact level. And I think during my time there, the impact level changed a bit from just writing code to being part of the conversation of what we should actually be focusing on for the next couple of years, because there are some development cycles that actually are relatively long.
Yeah.
So I think it's fun. It's something that maybe I wouldn't have thought about when I was doing, I guess, an academic career, where you are obviously also confronted with where you could be going as a field, as a research team. But since it wasn't really in your hand, you can think about it, and then you still have to deliver a thesis at the end of 3 years, right?
Yeah, I noticed that you think out of the box. You don't limit yourself by the things that you are, for example, studying or something. You search more. This is, I think it's an interesting perspective and path, that you just do what interests you, and you expand the area of your knowledge, and then you grow into different other roles. And
Thank you.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, I think there is context to pretty much everything, right? Decisions are not being made in isolation, or hopefully they're not made in isolation. And this context you kind of need to explore in order to understand where you are and where you want to go. And yeah, I agree. It's kind of the same as for computers, right? You're trying to figure out, what do I need to know in order to make this work? What are the kind of skills that I have to have in order to get a improvement of the status quo? That would be my biggest takeaway.
Are you still in this company?
No, I'm not. I changed roles actually relatively recently, by the beginning of 2025. So 1st of January, I joined ECCO, which is a large footwear manufacturer. So the role is called Director of Technology, Data and BI. It includes currently 3 teams. And in terms of headcount, it's a bit similar to what I had before at the edtech company. Mm-hmm. A bit higher actually, but it's a much more abstract role than a team lead, where you work very closely with every team member as part of the day-to-day and operations. Here, it's a bit more strategic.
So you also make decisions about the technologies, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's part of my role. And as you say, it's definitely challenging, right? Because there is so many constraints that you can have, and someone might have made positive experience with a certain technology and some others have negative. And you have to constantly think about, what is the team's skill set? What are the skill set of people that are working in other parts of the organization as well? Because they might also be interacting with part of your tech, even if they don't write any code for it. They might still be somewhat consumers of the technology that you're using. And then, of course, for many parts, especially if you are thinking about retail companies, some of the things are just existing from vendors already. You can go out, you can buy them. Some of them you cannot, because they're a bit more specific to your company. And some things you might want to be able to have a strong ownership on, and some a bit less. Where do you see the focus of the team, so to say? What should they be delivering? And how does each team member fit into the role of that team? And how does the team fit into the bigger role of the business value that you want to generate for the company? And where does this in turn reflect in the decisions that you have to make? So there's a lot of moving pieces. So it's very much in line with what I said before, where you're trying to create more impact. So there is now plenty of impact, but that of course comes also with challenges, because there are so many blind spots or things where if you are not doing actually any of the development yourself, where at least you cannot rely on just your own perception of things. You have to communicate constantly, of course, to all of the people involved in order to figure out what their experience is, what works well, what doesn't work well. Are we doing well operationally? Are we not doing well operationally? Are we set up for the things that we think should be happening in the next year or two? How does this fit into the bigger picture of where the company is moving? All of those things are with a lot of unknowns. So you have to some degree have a gut feeling of where that goes. And again, build your mental model and then constantly iterate on it and ask yourself whether that mental model is still accurate.
Yeah, and I imagine that it involves a lot of reading and being up to date to the technologies going on.
Yes, and reading emails, reading information. There's a lot of vendors involved, obviously, and a lot of businesses who are telling you how you're doing everything wrong and how it would be much better if you would buy their product, which of course makes a lot of sense. But at some point you have conflicting information that of course different vendors or stakeholders will give you, where they say, if you do A, everything will be solved. And the other person says, if you do B, everything will be solved, but A and B might be mutually exclusive. So you can't do both of them at the same time. And I guess they're diving enough into it in order to be able to challenge ideas and suggestions that will be coming is quite an important part. And I think something that is often difficult at a certain level of management to challenge ideas, and not just challenge them because you want to say, I want to be difficult. I want to challenge that. I don't trust what my team members are doing, but more, I would maybe call it asking questions, trying to understand, because maybe it clashes with your mental model right now, where you think this would be super easy to do. You asked some of your team leads and team members what is happening, and they tell you this is a very difficult thing. And at that point, it's probably going to be interesting for one of you, right? Either for your team member, because they will learn that it's very easy, or for you, because you learn that what you assume to be something that could be done within a day is actually involving so many complications. And I think that's more having this curiosity, again, asking these questions for finding these blind spots and unknowns. That's actually, I guess, a large part of it. So communication, big part.
Yeah, and it's difficult sometimes.
Yes, it can be very difficult, right? And it involves team building. It involves, I guess, creating somewhat of a trust atmosphere as well, where people can trust that you're not going to blindside them with your decision, that you can be somewhat predictable, I guess, in what you base your decisions on, in them understanding that you're looking for a positive outcome, and that positive outcome is not based on how you feel today or this week, but something that a bit more tangible.
Yeah.
So also that you don't flip back and forth between two options because you can't make a decision. There's so many things that are kind of involved into that sounds relatively straightforward. You lead teams. That's at least what it means so far for me. I'm talking mostly about engineering teams. It might be very different if you would lead some sales teams, if you would lead certain parts in a hospital where what you're doing might be a question of life and death, which for us, luckily, is not the case. But of course, we want to do a good job, right? And you want to create a good outcome.
That's true. And do you encourage the team to use AI tools on codes? Do you encourage these kind of technologies?
So AI is everywhere these days, isn't it?
Yes.
I do not encourage people to use AI for any of their code. Maybe a bit more on the skeptical side of this as a development overall. It's not that anyone is deterred from using any tools that they need in order to deliver the task at hand. The question is more, is there even something to gain from pushing a certain tool on everyone? We like to have people have a free choice of their development environment, because that's usually where they produce the best output. They're familiar with it. So I wouldn't push anything on them just to say, you should use this more. For using AI specifically, I would say the biggest fear I would have is people putting too much trust into the output. So you probably have the same where code reviews can be sometimes a lot harder than writing code, because you have to really think yourself into what the author has done. And there's been a lot of work in that direction of how we can support reviewers and how can we communicate the intent behind pull requests, change requests, commits, any of those kind of things. And I am a bit skeptical of people saying too much looks good to me and giving a thumbs up and saying, okay, great, let's just ship it. It's much more beneficial from my point of view if people are critical about it. And I think the same level of critical review they should, of course, put into any code that would be generated by someone else.
Yeah.
But in the end, you generate some code that will be solving your problem to some degree. You can use that in so many different scales. You can try to do it within very narrow constraints of a unit tested function in order to get some ideas about how you could lay out your processing routines. You could be thinking, I'm just using this to generate a whole skeleton of certain packages that are supposed to do X, Y, or Z. You can go further. You can you can try to just autocomplete as you write. So there's so many different levels where you could be using it. I'm not using it, but as I said, I'm also not writing any code myself currently, at least for professional reasons. And for private, I do not use it. It's the pleasure of writing it yourself. If I just wanted to be generated by someone else, then it probably wouldn't be a hobby anymore for me.
Yeah. Sometimes like there are some tasks that could be facilitated by AI, but it always needs a second eye or third eye.
The danger of that, even if you say there's a human in the loop, is, let's say it goes well 99% of the time, that you come to rely on this being good.
Yes.
You might have these kind of colleagues that write stellar code and that are just, they are spending so many hours making sure that everything is absolutely correct, and you get a review for their code and you look at it and you spend the next 2 hours reviewing it and you can't find anything wrong. You're probably very tempted to say, they did a great job, I approve this. And the more that happens, the more you probably just trust in their ability, and the less thorough you are in your review, which is maybe a part of just being human and deriving some kind of pattern from that.
Yeah.
So now I guess one of those options would be you could just take part of those AI results and not label them, but also put human results in there and just have that being part of your review cycle, but just having some kind of a human as an alibi in the loop that says thumbs up or thumbs down. I always feel that goes a bit short from the actual problem, which was probably just kind of like a success bias where they say yes.
Yeah, I like it actually. In GitHub, there is like a Copilot user like that will do a review, and sometimes it gives valuable feedback. This is useful because sometimes when we receive reviews from humans, sometimes we take it personally. I don't know, like sometimes people think it is like nitpicking or something like that. But then when the AI say that, we cannot blame them. It's okay. Let's resolve it.
I think there are so many things wrong with that, right? Because
but this is what I noticed.
Right. You're just moving responsibility off to another party. And I think that's where, like, I think at that point, we already have to ask ourselves, is it then the problem that the process is too cumbersome, or that we are too nitpicky in our review process? Obviously, there is a human component. I don't know, maybe there's some team building that can help so that people are seeing the constructive part in the first place, or maybe we have to work a bit on our formulation to make people feel that their code is not being ripped apart, but that is actually just being improved upon.
Yeah, maybe if someone says this code is wrong, the other person feels that I am wrong, not the code.
Right. Yes.
Something
Yeah,
like
exactly. and you might have labored over it for a long time, right? So you might have spent a long time doing it, and at that point, your ego becomes intertwined with the output that you produce, that if this thing wouldn't be as valuable as you thought it would be, then that would be somewhat that somehow taints your personal accomplishment. I think we all know that as a feeling. So it's something that happens, but I think it's the question of, can we improve that somewhat? Can we make a review be a bit more, I guess polite, but not polite and not flagging what we think is wrong. That is kind of the balance that you have to strike. And I guess some of it is, as we said, team building. So knowing maybe also your colleagues and the people that you work with outside of code review and work, all of that is probably beneficial, so that they know that there's another human sitting there and that they have hopefully good intentions. And if they don't have good intention, I think we're talking about a totally different problem that requires different solutions.
For sure. Yeah. And I think we covered many interesting parts, and I'm very impressed about your journey. We can move to the latest part, which is if you have an advice that you would like to share to the people, especially those who are starting their journey.
It's a good question. I would say, if I think back and if I would do things differently, I think having hobbies and not being afraid to actually do those hobbies also for a profession is probably a good one. There's not a lot wrong with that, even if I didn't want to do it. But there is a component where just being able to focus for a while on learning something that is of interest to you, I feel is valuable. It's never really wasted time for me. I spend a lot of time doing things that I don't immediately see as being beneficial in my professional life. And then sometimes even just a month later, sometimes a couple of years later, I come to actually benefit from it. So being curious about it and spending time with things, keeping at it and discovering more, it's always an enrichment, I feel. I dislike the idea of measuring upfront too much of what gain I could have from that later. And maybe I've been very privileged in that it aligned for me well with my interests, but at least it was my experience that it did not harm me to know more or to discover a bit more. So I guess whoever wants to start out on their journey should probably also just try to do similarly and do what they find interesting, instead of calculating if in 20 years they will be in a position X if they do the following. Life is much more unpredictable from my point of view than that. So
yeah, I really learned from our discussion. It's really interesting perspective, and it's like enjoying the process. We don't know what will happen next, but just do what makes you happy and continue the curiosity and ask questions and develop more skills.
Yeah, I think especially curiosity, just being curious how things work, and then you just go from there, right? And it's up to everyone to see at which level do I stop? Am I thinking about computers here? Am I thinking about physics or chemistry maybe at some point? Is it more the logical part of things? Am I curious how people are communicating to each other, or whether the code review and the anger that someone might have experienced is something that they find curious? Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
I think there's always so much specialization that one can do. Why not go for that?
Yeah, you're right. Thanks a lot for sharing with us about your journey. And I hope that you enjoyed your time also.
It was great. Lovely.
Thank you. So have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm looking forward to our next episode with a new guest and new inspiring story. Until then, stay safe and stay tuned to our next episode. Tic Tac, tackle the inspiration.